Well, we are waiting for some people. Wow. So here are all the attendees already. We've got some new people here. Excellent. Okay. So listen up, everybody. I'm going to wait for James to get on board, and there he is, and allow him to present, and then I will open the conversation up to everybody else afterwards, because I don't think it makes sense to have these tight conversations or this large group conversation before the presentation has been done. So, James, there you are. Good to see you.
Hi.
How are you?
All right. You?
I'm doing well. It's nice and warm here. It's sunny out.
All
So
right.
I get to sit inside and remain a vampire as I like. We gather, if we get too much sun, we become too friendly, and then we don't bite our
Okay.
clients.
Good. Very good.
So,
Um, so, how many are people on yet?
yes, there's 10 people on board plus the two of us, a couple of friends,
Okay.
and the rest are people I don't know who probably know you and are here to see and hear and support you.
Can I
And
can I see them for a moment?
a bit of, I'll read it to you. Charles Whitman, Cynthia
Yep.
Hoskin, Deborah
Nope.
Trebitz
Yes.
is here, Mario Lane,
Yes.
Naoto,
Nato Nakagawa.
sorry for my pronunciation there, Pat
Nakagawa.
Bob,
Nato. Hi.
Terry Phillips
All right.
are the ones who are here at the moment. And as I said, I wanted to give you a chance to briefly do your presentation before we open the conversation. And I'm going to invite everybody in as a panelist as soon as you're done with your initial presentation so that we can get into the conversation part of this.
All right. Um,
So the mic is yours.
you
Take
want
it.
me to go? All right. So, put this in context. A little bit of photo history, not based on materials, but based on what was shot. Photography came about was introduced in 1839. For the first 50 years or so, it was faces and landscapes. Landscapes early on because the exposures were so long it didn't move and so forth. Um, Photography was probably will take some credit for the fact that painters no longer had to paint things to look like it, and Impressionism and Cubism and Fauvism and all of that came out of, I assert, and there's others that believe too, the existence of photography. But photography up through about, for the first 80 years, up through about 1920, the obligation of photography was to take a picture of, make an image that looked like something. So the obligation was to,
It was representative, basically.
yes, it was a direct observation. In 1922, Alfred Stieglitz introduced his images of clouds and called them equivalences, and probably freed up photographers from doing representative, demonstrative pieces. So from 1922 on, we had different things happening. In 1978, John Sierkowski put together a show at the Museum of Modern Art representing the 1960s and 70s, two decades of photography. He called them windows and mirrors. He was talking about windows as direct observation and mirrors as introspective narratives. I think that there's also a responsibility not just of photographers to do that, but of viewers to do that. So I tend to uh, look at my viewer, the viewer of my objects, to bring to it, which they do to everything. It's not just mine, but there's more of a demand of people viewing my work to understand who they are, what they bring to it, to get some meaning out of it. There's meaning in it, and we could go through it. So I have it set up here. I have 29 images that were printed for a show in a law office here in Miami earlier this year before the coronavirus. So there is a filter because it was a law office and there were things that they didn't want to show in the law office. So we'll start with that. And we can get through that. I'm looking at my screen, my camera's in the way here. So I'll set this up. Okay. Let me see what we've got. There we go. All right. So I'll start off easy. Easy meaning it's easy to look at, it's understandable, you can bring to it what you will. But we'll go on through this. I'm working large format, 4x5. These prints are 20 by 24, printed on warm tone Ilford paper, if any of that makes any difference to anybody looking at them. So if there's a warmth to it on the screen, that's accurate. If your screen, we know that color isn't always the same color on all monitors, so we could go from there. So we've got, let's just see if we can go through these. Okay. And there is some interpretation here through the medium of the video, the monitor here. There's more detail and richness in the dark areas here than you can see. So
yeah, but we have to assume that. I mean,
yeah,
this is, we're dealing with stream technology, so we're going to have degradation just based on that.
Right.
On top of all the points that you just made. So we will project the beauty that these prints have, and I can vouch for that because I've seen some of them and they are really quite exquisite.
All right, so we're just going through some of these. I guess we'll hold the question and answer till after we look at all of this. Is that what your intention is?
Yes, I've written to everybody. The Q&A is open, so if there's any questions that anyone has, please write them in the Q&A. Each of you have that button somewhere, and then they'll pop up. And James, you should see them as well as me.
Okay.
Because you're now an equal presenter to me, and then we can address those individually. And like I said, after the presentation, we'll go through and bring everyone into the conversation.
All right. So that script is in German. What can you see? Can you translate it?
Liebe erobert alle. Well, erobert alle means conquers all.
Love.
And I assume that the word that's in her décolleté is erobert, which means conquers. And the word on her left breast is alle, meaning everybody or all. And I assume the word on her above her right breast would be Liebe, because that's the only thing I could take out of that context that would make sense. It's the last letters of the word Liebe. And I can't think of another word that would, fit that match. Jan, if you have a better idea, then let me know.
Well, that's only important in one way, and it's not important in other ways. So yeah, we could go. So what happens in some of these people, I think a lot of tattoos are like photographs, snapshots that people do, in that they represent a place or time in their life. This image of the in the foreground here is an image of the person that the ink is on.
Ah, okay.
There's other examples we can talk about. So as an example of that, the never forget is a reference to 9/11. It was very impactful for her. Actually, my studio was only about 10 blocks from the World Trade Towers when they went down. I don't know where she was at the time, but that event had a lot of effects on a lot of people, me personally too. So, although I didn't go out and get a tattoo.
Yes, well, that was a cultural change for
Yeah.
the world.
Actually, all of this work is really an outgrowth of that because up until that point, I was busy about going about life in New York. And while I'd moved there in 1974 to work as an artist, couldn't make a living at it, started a business. It's like I was not really doing much creative shooting. And after 9/11, it was it seemed to me important that I either do what I came to New York to do, which was to make art, or I should leave because there were certainly safer places to be and easier places to live than New York City. So, you know, this work comes out of that effort. This was a very cold day in the studio.
It looks like it.
Uh,
And so these people that you photographed, these are models that you hired, or are they people that you know, friends, colleagues, or how,
for
what's the
the most
relationship?
part, for the most part, I hired them. There's a website, One Model Place. Met through them. This woman I worked with, actually, the image over my right shoulder is her also. Um, this is a reference to an homage to New Descending Staircase. Um, and she modeled, worked with me for that. So, you know, some of the women became friends over the period of time that we worked. Um, Generally, I think they were all paid a nominal fee. I mean, really not outrageous sums of money.
Well, I mean, the money issue is one thing, but I'm more interested, or my question is more focused on the idea of, uh, you know, I mean, nudes can be, or nudes have various representations in the arts depending on the relationship of the model and the artist. And it's always interesting to understand how those parts fit together. You know, these for me, what I see here is they're clearly rendered as kind of abstract pictures in the structure and in the not immediate recognizability. I mean, some are more recognizable just because, but you know, they're not, these do not appear to me to be things that are like, okay, so this is obviously what this is. And to have a model open up to that and to be able to engage in that kind of representation or visualization. I don't want to say representation because that's actually the wrong word for it. This kind of visualization is just, it's an interesting idea to consider. Like, how did that work, and what parts were involved? And you know, the trust that's built between the artist and the model is fundamentally key, and much more so in photography than in any other medium. It's a much more humanist medium in that regard, because the thing you're photographing when photographing a model, you can't fix it. You can't make it more relaxed with your brush. The person is either relaxed or not, or is either showing you uh, the thing that you're looking for to capture the image, or not.
Right.
And
So some of the models I worked with on multiple occasions. Uh, this 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 person I did. She worked with me um, 4 or 5 or 6 occasions. Some of the images, this image, this particular image was after we worked together for a number of times. But other images, there was one chance to work with this model. She's a professional. She did nude modeling and was pretty flexible in terms of what we could do. I always think in the very beginning, I worked high school and college newspapers, and I shot basketball and football games. And I always thought basketball was a good training for most everything, be it weddings or things like this, where you instantly can recognize the situation and get a picture. As you do more of it, you get better at it. And that's sort of what I find here too, is like working with the same model, I get better, but also working with more models, I can be better the next time I'm working with somebody. So these two were the same model. I've never seen anybody that shape. And while we were there, she goes, "Ooh," and she's looking at her belly, and I go, "What?" She says, "Well, see that line?" And it was pink. And she says, it was like, and that was an instant stretch mark that just happened. And I go, wow. So I get to learn all kinds of things that are very interesting while all of these things happen. I just like shapes too. I think, so these are the images that the curator, we'll put that in quotes, at the law office said I could show. So if we're interested in looking at harder images, harder to live with and look at and understand, we can do that. So there's some here. So not all of these are photographs of prints. Some of them are scans and negatives, and you can see the difference. So somehow
do be careful, just as a warning, that we don't get flagged and have the archive video then removed from Facebook for this. So we should keep this inside of, let's say, a safe bracket. And if anybody has specific interest, they can reach out to either me or you to look at the rest of the body of work.
So we won't show any vaginas on this one, huh?
Right. Thank you.
Well, we'll just do the first three here. So this was it. Now, here's one that I think is a beautiful image. It could be considered erotic, and yet, if you understand what the scars on her arm are, it can be very disturbing. This woman is a cutter, and those are self-inflicted wounds. And so in terms of what I want people to understand is that there's a lot of different ways to look at the images I produce. And this is one of them. You can look at it straight up as an image, and then you can go into, oh my God.
Well, maybe
so
you
that's sort of it. I think, yeah.
Maybe you could speak briefly about the one image of the woman with the scars, which had to do with ashes. And I want to let you tell the story, but I think you know the one I'm talking about.
Yeah, let me get back to
it. Was in the first group that you showed about a third of the way down. Yeah.
So some of the things, I mean, this is the same person a couple years later, I think. She really appreciated what I did, and I liked working with her. But a lot of the stories I learned about the ink or the scarification was not directly from the person that had it, but from friends of that person. And so a friend of hers was telling me that, so my understanding is that there's three ways to create scars. That there's branding, hot material put on it will create a scar. There's small parallel lines cut with a scalpel, and then the skin is ripped out in between those lines. And the third way is to open a deeper incision and put something in that incision to create more of a keloid, more of a scar. And my understanding is that was what she did, was the third way. And what she put in her open incisions there that came over her heart were her mother's ashes. And it's like oh my God, and wow, isn't that endearing? So, it's like, okay, so this image should be, depending on what your familiarity is with scarification, is interesting to say the least. And in this case, that story adds more to it. I can't, I can't and won't walk around every time that picture's up and tell the story, but for people here now, that's the story with this.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting story because, again, one of the points that I wanted to discuss with you, and maybe we can open the conversation in sometime very, very soon, is the understanding that pictures change their meaning with understanding, sometimes to the better and sometimes to the worse. If you see something like an act of heroism in a photograph, and you later discover that that was just completely made up, then the picture loses all of its weight unless you're capable of hanging on to the very specific ideal of heroism as a representation, and you see the picture as reminding you of the abstraction of heroism. And in this particular case, this picture with the scars, and this is clearly also a question of beauty, because I mean, in this particular picture, you can see, she's got a very healthy body. The breasts are not sagging at all, so it's very much the ideal of the young virulent woman. And then the scars are there, but they're also extremely aesthetic. It's not a scar of damage. It doesn't look like an invasion, like something like that. And then to hear on top of that the story behind it, and it then almost becoming a monument that she carries, that changes, from at least in my perception, the way that this picture works. It changes the entire impact of it. And I think that that's a really interesting idea to understand and to debate, particularly in the context of things that we've discussed previously in the show, that pictures really only do live in their fulfillment when they're made and seen. And that interpretation layer, that personal story, and gaining that personal story, becomes a very important part of how an artwork's life uh, kind of is becomes fruitful, or exists, if you will.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have stories like that about each of the pictures I've done.
Well, it doesn't need to have one every time,
No,
but
right. So the other thing you talked about, and I forgot to mention this, but one of the aspects of photography as a medium in the arts is that it allows an establishment. It represents time, a specific time, an amount of time that no other medium in the fine arts does. And these images represent now. And in 20 years, they're going to have a different meaning and a different take. And that is important to me too, as to how they represent the time that they're taken in. And I think that's true of most images I see. They are representative of the time. If it's an Eagleston from the 50s or 60s, or whoever it might be, that time is represented. If it's a street scene of Paris in 1920, it's pretty explicit that that's 1920.
That's true. And I think in photography, I fully agree with you that that is significantly more poignant than in any of the other mediums, particularly when thinking about things like abstraction. If you're looking at post-war abstract art, it becomes a lot more difficult to frame the time without historical knowledge. With
Right.
photography, it's a bit easier because of the references inside it, and the connections of those to history. So yeah, and of course, time in the micro sense means, the infamous saying of the decisive moment, which I always try and remind people that the decisive moment is not fast, it's decisive. And sometimes the decisive moment takes a long time, and sometimes it comes very quickly. So,
Right.
you know, okay. So, well, James, thank you for the presentation. Beautiful work. And now I'm going to start bringing people in from top to bottom to join the conversation, and we can go into either gallery mode or you can leave these up. And so, everyone, give me a second because I have to literally manually add every person here into panelist mode, which always takes a moment because Zoom weirds on me when I do this. It doesn't weird on me. All right. And make sure everyone turns their cameras on or at least their microphone if they want to join the conversation. If not, then okay, that's that. And then we're gonna get Cynthia in here. And yeah, we got a big crowd today.
All right.
20 people are here.
Barb Frazee, I've known her, I think, what, 7th grade? What's that, about 80, 90 years or something like
Müssen wir
that?
leise reden. Warte mal, man sieht gleich, wenn man online ist.
Yeah.
Hello.
Nato, you got your camera on?
Oh, no, this was my hand in front of the camera. I want to go into this presentation, you know, where I see everybody, but I cannot see everybody.
Oh, I think, James, if we want to go into gallery mode, you have to turn off your screen share.
Okay, let me find, where do I do that?
At the bottom, stop sharing.
I can see. I have gallery mode and I can see.
No, stop, oh, it's, all right, stop sharing. All right, there we go.
Okay. Now we go in gallery mode.
Oh, wow.
This is pretty cool. Hello.
This is going to be the huge conversation. All right, I got one for Taylor. Sorry, Taylor, it's stuck at the end of the list. Sorry, Taylor, you're the last one in. Okay, gallery mode. There we are. Wow.
A lot of people I haven't seen for a while. Oh, this is
And
great.
yes, either sitting in the mountains or has a lovely background image.
Hi, Taylor.
Hi, everybody. Sherry's microphone is off.
Was kommt mit dazu?
This is Deborah's, and everybody else is joining in step by step. Great. Now we have 21 panelists, and I don't know if everyone will be able to be seen at the same time.
Oh my hair. Oh my God.
How does mine look? Is that, did I
You know, my haircut is called Corona.
Taylor and Nato?
Can you see me?
Yes, I can. You got your camera on, Nato. I see it.
Okay.
And I can hear you.
Okay, good. Okay. So I got a question.
Yes.
So you talked about this this time element, and like I'm not sure because it's on the computer or not, but the many of the photograph they seems to be a little bit blurred, not razor sharp image. Is that your intention?
No, I think that's probably, these are critically sharp. I'm working large format. I'm using all of the tools of that camera to make sure that I have the either correct narrow depth of field or extended depth of field. So if it doesn't look sharp, that's we're at the mercy of the technology.
Okay, so intentionally it's a very sharp image.
Very,
yeah?
very sharp. Very
Okay, okay, yeah, because I thought this was especially the one that was on the screen was the one with the scars, two scars. Yeah, they were very much blurred, and I thought that this was part of their intention.
You can see the hair follicles.
Okay, okay.
All right.
What I see is that you got two huge beard or mustache or whatever you call.
Yeah. A little bit out of New York.
That's
Haven't seen
wonderful.
anybody here for a while. This is great. This is old
That's
home week.
wonderful. That's wonderful. Yeah.
Barb, turn your camera on. John Chapel, Marjo, turn your cameras on. Robin, turn your cameras on. Paul.
I can't figure out how to do it.
Down in the lower left, there's a camera icon. Click on that. Okay,
Oh, okay.
questions.
There we go.
There we go. All right, Barb. No questions?
Yeah. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you talk about you left the process of the negative from the 4x5
Right.
as part of the work. Can you talk about your thoughts about that?
So I'm a product of graduate school in the 70s, and in the 70s, it was a big deal to do a filed out frame on your 35 millimeter to show your commitment to the image. I kind of like that, so I continue to do it. I mean, I did a lot of pictures at the beach, Jones Beach, and I printed them with that device showing that I'd seen exactly what I wanted to see and mashed the button at that point, when in fact I took everything not looking through anything and just snapped the pictures from my waist. So that as a vehicle, or as a it's important for me to have that full frame element there. As opposed to, Julian, we're talking about in one of the earlier things where you can always crop everything. I choose not to.
Well, you know, I mean, I always found that if you're committing yourself to the frame, you're also committing yourself to a very specific surface with which you're speaking. And that surface isn't always the right surface to speak with. You know, a 6x6 is going to inherently have a different impact in the way it renders than a 35 millimeter or an 8x10.
Exactly. And that's intentional on my part.
Which I think it's absolutely legitimate, but I wouldn't, you know, I find it's important to speak to photographers who are still developing their voice, that doesn't improve or worsen the photography. It's just a choice, an aesthetic choice, like all the others that are inside the artistic process.
Exactly. And it does have meaning if you want to put meaning on it.
Yeah. And of course, those kind of prints where you have the negative frame, or you know, the blackout through the frame holder, there's a different physicality, a different sensuality to it. You know, it's those can be, I mean, just in terms of presenting them, like the way you've clipped them onto the wall, you can do that with that kind of picture. And as long as you don't have small children who are spewing Coke around your household or juice or something, you can actually hang a picture that way on your wall and enjoy the actual physical object just hanging there, which doesn't really work if you've got, you know, a cleanly cropped and finished image. It's so it does have impact on other aspects of it. And that again becomes something which, you know, as I deal with clients and presentation for their own work in their home situations or their exhibition situations, that's very much an aesthetic choice. You know, how things are hung, how they're framed, and so on.
Yeah, this was purely a financial choice.
Okay, I have a few. You know, I'm a portrait photographer. I love portrait, or in general human photography. You know, so I'm very thrilled to see the pictures. And my main interest is always, like I shared last time, identity is a big thing that I'm trying to capture somehow. And so I was very amazed to see those images. And if you go to my website, you would probably find something little similar, but with a head. You know,
I saw that. I did look at your site.
Yeah, thank you. So for me, you know, I want to show the person, and that the viewer can start relating to the person, and shows interest in the person, and starts somehow an interaction. In your approach is very anonymous, you know.
Yes.
And I'm wondering why. Because I also thought in my series, you know, should I also only take detailed pictures of cuts or burns or whatever? You
have one picture.
I have one, yeah, actually. So I'm wondering why you make it so, because the person with the cuts, you wanna look a little. At least that's what I felt when I'm looking at these pictures. I want to look that person in the eyes and understand.
Yeah, I think that the intention is that my conversation is not with the person, that it is anonymous. Well, yeah, I think when you make it an individual, the individual gets in the way of the geometry of the image and the ability, and it's directing the viewer, where I would rather not direct the viewer so specifically, as to say this is that person, but I think this is what we're looking at. We don't. One of the things that photography does is it allows us to see things that we don't or haven't seen. And I think that's what this is doing more than if I shot a portrait of the person, including the face. I mean, I do faces. You know, the first couple pieces were faces.
Yeah.
And I usually, when I'm shooting, I start out at the top and just work down the body. So I have a lot of faces. Faces aren't necessarily as interesting as the geometry of the body and the marks on the body that I'm interested in at this point. And I think that's the reason for it.
Okay, thank you.
At least that's the way I've made it up in the moment.
And I've also found that having the face and the automatic projection of personality onto a face that's seen in an image changes the understanding of the image. If there's no face, the body becomes more abstract. And I think in this particular case, there were some pictures there that reminded me of Weston's vegetables, of the pumpkin.
Weston also did a series on torsos, which was kind of the point of departure for me. I write quotes on Post-its and put them on my monitor, and I've got this one from Robert Capa, not necessarily referring to the same thing, but he said, if your pictures aren't good enough, you're not close enough. I saw that after I did all of this, but you know, he's talking about something a little bit different, but it has meaning too, has meaning and significance. Also, ICP had was asking photographers to complete the sentence, photography is. Now they didn't come to me and ask me, but I did it. And my sense of photography is what we do to see. And I think the ubiquity of images out here and everybody stopping to take pictures is really, they're trying to see where they are. I spent 9 months going around the world. I had a lot of camera equipment, shot for me at that point, a lot of film. And I got back and I realized that I'd spent so much of my time just creating a composition in a rectangle. And I didn't live the experience. And so I don't take a lot of pictures with when I travel anymore, because I'd rather be in the moment and in the experience. So that's very different from what I'm doing here in the studio.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Hmm.
How big are the prints?
These are 20 by 24,
Okay, 50, 60.
50 by 60, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've built a darkroom where I can go as large as the width of the roll of paper, the 42 by 34. Although I don't have an easel and I don't have trays yet for that. So my intention is to eventually go that big. But these are all done by an enlarger, not digitally. So you're pretty
Yeah.
it's very limiting. Yeah.
My grandfather, the photo studio he started here in Cologne, Sander Photo, was specialized in wallpaper photography. They created these processes for making large format prints, and he had a dark room which was a barn that you could fit, like 5 cars in, with train tracks on the floor, and he had his enlarger with a ridiculously strong light in it. And he would hang the paper on one wall, and he would then roll the enlarger back, and it had a tilt shift lens in it or something, so that he could accurately do that. And then they would roll the paper, and they would basically slush it through buckets of developer. So you always had to have 2 people in the developing process because they were holding on to it and like running the paper quickly back and forth through the chemicals to get them developed.
Hmm.
It was the whole thing. It was like in the 1950s, late 40s, early 50s.
Yeah.
And I remember actually seeing that enlarger. I was actually in that room because they still had it in the early or in the mid 70s. When I was there, and I can remember it. So have fun with printing those.
Yeah, I can imagine.
James, I have a question. One of the images that you showed was of someone who cut intentionally, and another image that I thought was really powerful was the image in which the young woman had placed some of her mother's ashes, and that's a different kind of scarring. As an artist, do you see any difference in the way you approach the subject depending on the nature of that scarring, or is it the same to you?
The simple answer is no. There's no difference. It's I'm not really looking for meaning in the with the subject. It's more I'm looking to create meaning with the image. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm aware of why they were done, but it's not a conversation I have with the model at the time.
Right. I mean, if I were looking at the images, I don't know that that's a question that would come up for me. I think I would, first of all, like you're saying, be concerned about image as image. But I'm also intrigued by the stories that you're telling about the particular ones that you've shown.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think that reflects something on just the nature of suffering in the world. I mean, I think that it signifies something like that.
Yes. But see, that's for the viewer to bring to it.
Right.
Yeah, and this again, touches on the fact that the viewer is important. I'm going to call it the Trinity of the arts.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the does the tree make a sound when it falls on the wood and nobody's there to hear it? It's like, well, does the photograph have any meaning with nobody looking at it?
Right.
So are you showing these images in galleries? Exhibitions?
I retired in 2013 from my business, my job in New York City, and moved to Miami. And this is the show I had in this law firm was the first show I had with them. And these are actually the first prints I've made. I've been shooting these since shortly after 9/11. scan the images, but I haven't really had an opportunity to make prints. I made
Okay.
it some years ago, but you know, when you're running a business and you're not making money selling prints, it's hard to take time to do that.
So
Now
what response did you get from the people in the exhibition?
Well, it was the law office. People showed up that were clients of the law firm. One person we're in Miami, and one person was looking at this picture of this, one of the last images I showed with the woman that had the breast up against her cheek. And he asked for an explanation as to what it was. He was interested in it. So I told him, I says, you ought to buy this. You like this, you buy it. And he said, well, I got to check with my wife. So, that was about the response that I got.
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine the American audience having a real tough time dealing with it. You know, Europe is a lot more relaxed when it comes to nudity in general. You know, the differentiation is or the understanding of nudity is much more complex here than it is in the US, where it seems to be if someone's naked, then all they want to do is have sex and that's it. There's no other reason to be naked, which is a ridiculous idea. But you know, it's having grown up there, that's the experience I had, and I haven't found evidence of anything else.
Yeah, and particularly if you get off the East Coast and you go into the Midwest or the South, I mean, the reaction to the naked body is very different. So that's all part of the intention that I have here, is that it is hard for some people. It's not so hard for other people, and culturally, the reaction to the prints is expected and is very different. So you know, that's I don't know by design, but it's in existence. It is. It's deliberately not easy for a lot of people.
Well, you know, when the image and the text that I used today for the announcement for the show was also discussion of beauty. And when looking at naked bodies, one tends to assume that the term beauty has to do with physical beauty in the sense of, you know, the relationship of the body seen to a given beauty ideal.
Yeah, the socially accepted norms, right?
Right. And I think what's interesting about these pictures, because of the fine balance that you've shown in how you frame them, you know, the way you took the pictures, the way you composed them, is that they allow the understanding of beauty removed from the body aesthetic. These are beautiful pictures of organic shapes, as well as they are beautiful pictures of naked people.
Right.
And I think that's a really interesting way to understand it, because it also opens the entire, or at least for me it did in looking at them, it opens up the idea that you can look at an object and you don't necessarily need, you don't need to bind yourself to the representation that it has.
Right, and that's intentional. And if we could show, which we can in this venue, pictures of vaginas that I have, it's like, it's the same thing. It's like, okay, we know what that is and you're supposed to do with it, but it's not, you know, and it's not like, oh, this is a flower. Well, no, it's not a flower. It's what it is.
Yeah.
But you know, again, we can't necessarily show that here. Any other thoughts or questions? Well, this is great seeing some old friends, Robin and Barb. That's where you are on my screen. Barb's over there, Robin's over here, Richard, Debbie.
So can I ask a question to the prints? To
Yeah.
me, they look very soft in contrast. Maybe that's also the screen.
I think it's the screen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because it goes from maximum black to wherever the highlights need to be.
Okay, because I wished there would be a little bit more energy, but if that's probably the screen.
Well, I'm trying to print representationally, not create high contrast or anything. I mean, if I'm looking for, all right, so this is technical stuff, but I'm looking for, shadow detail going to maximum black and coming up into the highlights wherever they belong, but textured highlights.
Mhm.
So if it looks other than that, I think we have to blame the medium that we're looking at.
Okay.
Jim,
Yeah, Richard.
can you describe your darkroom?
Maybe we could take a tour of that some other day. I've got, currently I have 3 enlargers, an 8x10 Durst and 2 5x7 Dursts. The 2 5x7s have variable contrast heads on it. One's a zone 6 and one's, what's the other one? I don't remember at the time. I have a sink that's about 20 some odd feet long in the darkroom, and then I have a finished sink out here to wash it that's bigger. So it's good size and designed for large prints. Richard, talking about your wallpaper prints, I visited, there's a photographer here in Florida. I don't know if people know him. Drawing a blank on his name all of a sudden. Anyway, he's in my opinion, the Ansel Adams of the Everglades. The name will come to me. But I visited his darkroom, and he had a setup there with a 8x10 enlarger on tracks, and he could do up to 4x5 foot prints. And I thought, whoa, that'd be great. He had a darkroom where he had, 6 or 7 4x5 foot trays, sinks that he could drag the prints to. I thought, wow, that's great. I'd love to do that. And then this horizontal enlarger in Indiana, I believe, came up for sale. And so John Shabel and I bought it. It came with 4 4-foot by 8-foot vacuum panels that were a wall. And
Oh, wow.
went out and bought that and the enlarger, and didn't have any place to store it in New York. So my friend Richard in Rochester had a little more storage. So I stored it there thinking that one of these days I'd set it up. And then it became clear that I was never going to have the barn to put all this equipment in. So I think it all ended up just being sold as scrap. It was disappointing. So my darkroom's not that big.
The Everglades photographer is Clyde Butcher.
Clyde Butcher, right. Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, he has an amazing darkroom. But so we're losing people. We're getting boring. We shouldn't quit.
Would you build a larger darkroom if you could?
No. No, I'm too old for that. It's like one of these days in the past, maybe if I had the space and the time, my wife, everybody can see you, sweetheart, going like that.
Your microphone is off, Sarah.
Yeah. So yeah, no, I got a big enough darkroom.
You could live in your darkroom, couldn't you?
Yeah, I might have to. But at least in the pandemic, it's a 6-foot walk from the house to the studio, and the studio is big and the darkroom's big, and I finally got it all together. So we can do that. It's such a mess.
So,
Yeah.
James, do you continue the project, the series?
I'm sorry?
Do you continue the series, the project on this?
I haven't, I was talking with Julian about this earlier. Since we've been down here in 2013, it took a couple of years to get this house and studio together and move in and set up and all of that. I have not had an opportunity to shoot. I've sort of put feelers out with some models that I'd like to shoot, but it's very different in Miami than it is in New York. So I haven't had anybody just jumping at the opportunity to work with me. I haven't been pushing it either, but you know, after this, we'll see if and it seems like some of the, so Florida, the southern three counties, which were in South Florida, are still closed down, but the northern counties are open in the state. So it's a real weird situation down here, and I don't know if how soon I'd really want strangers coming into the studio and being exposed to that, because Sarah and I are still rather stay at home, not going out and so it's still a little scary, you know. But I'm not going to shoot again, you know. And having not shot for so long, I'll probably start back where I left off because that's familiar, but I've got other ideas too. You know, it's kind of weird to be not working for so long.
Sure.
Jim, are you missing New York?
That question is yes and no. I get up there occasionally, but I'm glad I don't live there anymore. You know, it's like it's just it was getting to be too difficult. Yeah, too difficult, too expensive. And
James,
you know,
we overlapped in New York, I think, because I was there when you were, and was there during 9/11. But I was in Brooklyn. I was in the Williamsburg area of Brooklyn when I was in New York. But I moved back. I moved away in 2012.
Yeah. Okay. We were in Soho, just north of just at Canal Street there. So that was close enough. It's too close.
So, how long did you work on the series?
On these, well, some of these, working with negatives that I produced in New York, the most recent ones were 2013. The earlier ones went back to 05, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that goes back to 05. And it's like, so the body of work right now represents about 3,500 images. And I did contacts on them. At the time, I selected, in real time, I selected images that I scanned, that I picked out and scanned. And I thought those were the ones worthy of each shoot. But I've gone back recently and looked at some of the contacts, and I'm looking at some of these pictures and I go, well, why didn't I pick that one? Because now then it looks, I like it. You know, before it didn't make sense. So this is also part of the time. I mean, with 3,500 negatives, I could be printing for a long time and not get tired or run out of images. But
Yeah,
shooting is more fun than printing for me.
Both needs to go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Well, listen, everybody, we're coming close to an hour, and I'm trying to keep these wrapped to an hour. So thanks everyone for being here. It's great to have such a large audience involved in the show. The show is being viewed by a number of people. Top view count so far is about 150 views of one of the videos. So it's been it's an ongoing and enjoyable adventure, which I'm very happy to share with all of you. Please tell your friends about it and to join in. And Brian also PM'd me that he has something he'd like to speak to briefly about a project at the MoMA. So I'm going to give the word to him before I close the session for today. And Brian.
Yeah.
Right.
So let me see if I can share my screen. I don't have the slides up. I wanted to let you know there was a live presentation yesterday on the MoMA YouTube channel, and it was Sarah Meister, and she was talking about your grandfather's work and the changing of how titles in the collection had changed over time, but then talked about the August Sander project and a viewing project they had open to the public to come in and look at original prints. I can email you that, but I wanted to send you the link to that because it was an interesting discussion.
Well, that project started because of a sale I made to the MoMA.
Ah.
That entire project is the brainchild of Sarah Meister and Noam Alcott, which is built on a conversation that Sarah and I had previously, which Noam in parallel developed the idea that Sanders' work specifically was meaningful to more people than people inside of the arts. And if it's possible for one body of work to be that, then it's possible for any body of work to be that. And our assumption in the art, in kind of the art bubble that many people live in, that regular people, if you will, don't enjoy, and don't have anything to speak to about the arts, that's a complete fallacy. And so we came up with the idea of, wouldn't it be great to have different people come in and talk about August Sanders' portfolios, of which there are 49 in People of the 20th Century. And exactly parallel to that, Noam was coming up with the same idea, and he wrote to Sarah, and so it kind of blew up from there. And I've been at every single one of those. I was supposed to be speaking this year, but this year has been postponed until next year because of the said pandemic. So it's going to be on September 10th of next year. And they have a book planned where all of the presenters' texts are going to be published. So they're still continuing to work on that. And it's been a really great project to work on with them. I'm also at the same time working on a homepage where I'm creating a research database which interconnects every negative of August Sanders. You know, we know of approximately 11,000 negatives, all of which I have scans of. And there are some prints that we have where there are no negatives of them because they got lost. We know that about 75% of Sanders' work got lost after the war. And those negatives, or those prints that we find, we put in as lost negatives. And I'm creating an interactive system which is going to be connected to linked open or JSON linked data. So open data sources, to be able to really dig into the images, dig into the historical aspects of it, the exhibition histories, the books, and the further plan with the August Sander Foundation that I founded a number of years ago is to make that material available to artists and to students and to educators, to be able to give people access to that body of work, as not only because I think Sanders' work is important, but as a model of how information can be shared and can be integrated into the learning process for people.
Sarah Meister, I know from working at MoMA, this was years ago before the project started, but it was a time when you could just request to see the work of any photographer you wanted to see in the MoMA before its expansion. And that day I happened to want to see something by William Christenberry, and I went up and she got it out, wrote it out, and just showed it. I actually have the slide, if I can go now to the screen. And so this was one of the images that she showed during the talk that's on YouTube. I don't think it's live. I don't think it's active now as a link. I think it's to be posted.
Yeah, that's Judith Ross on the right, in the back there. Judith is an absolute sweetheart as well.
And this is, let's see. Yeah, that's one of the images that she talked about. She spent a little bit of time talking about this image, and on the back, wanted to show on that slide how MoMA was cataloging early on and accepting the original titles, and then that has changed over the course of time. But she also addressed a topic you were talking about last week, which is how to determine whether prints that are made after an artist's death are legitimate in terms of the work and being accepted into collection. So she spent some time talking about that as well. And then influence.
Actually, I can say a lot about this particular picture. First off, it's my favorite picture by August Sander, period. Has been for many years. I could explain that later. Second off, it's a window mount, which means it's pre-war. It's a cropped window mount that was in a portfolio, which you can tell because of the glue remnants on the right side of the back, because August would put a cellophane cover, which you would glue to the back edge on portfolio prints. And the earlier prints were 49 centimeters high. And then my grandfather, because after the Second World War, the 49 centimeter paper was no longer available, August started printing on 45 centimeter paper. In standard, not printing, but mounting on 45 centimeter sheets. And so at some point he just started cutting the tops and bottoms off. So sometimes you'll find these prints with a wet stamp, a sticker on the back cut in half. And interestingly enough, the back paper, this blue back paper, is one of 4 different types of back paper I have in my inventory here. And I'm still trying to figure out what the connection of those back papers is, because August printed these prints and finished them for very specific purposes, but there's no history of what those purposes were because his studio books got lost. So it's an assumption that these were either done for a client or they were done for an exhibition. And last note, that piece of paper at the bottom glued on top, that was glued there by my grandfather, not my great-grandfather. So, because he was doing that during exhibition time so that people knew what picture it was. This was before the pictures became expensive. So that's just a little bit of random Sander factoids for you.
Great. All right.
Yeah, it's a great project. And I'm really, really indebted to Sarah and Noam both for doing such an absolutely fantastic job. And for the speakers, I mean, we've had some just extraordinary presentations during that time. So I think it's going to be really, it's going to be a real enlightenment and a real expansion of how people can look at a body of work going forward, because this is done beyond the work. It's done as an example of how historical material can be addressed and can be brought into a contemporary conversation. So
I'll send you a link to that video when it's available. It's,
yeah, please do.
of course, I'm taking with them, but it should be available today at some point.
Julian, do you post, you record this, do you post it someplace?
They are on my Vimeo, on the archive of the show, which you can see on my homepage, galleryjuliansander.de/TV. And then actually I have to go through and put like different header pictures on them because it has the same like icon picture, which is kind of useless. So maybe I should go in as these are starting to grow, that I don't have to actually rewatch all of them. Remember what we talked about and put some titles to them to help people to understand what it is.
I have to leave you. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. It's great to have so many again. And be safe, everybody.
Yeah, great to hear from you, Jim. It's wonderful that
Well, it's
your
good.
work is maturing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite.
Be safe.
Thank you all.